The bigger problem is probably just benign negligence. Like, how many times do you and Michael say this to your clients? Read your freaking contract. Like,
Mhm.
you have to understand the contract in detail and everything that's in there. And many of us just don't do the
Yeah,
legwork to read everything.
yeah, that's true. And even before that, when you register as Sam, you're representing a lot within those representations and certifications starting out there. And so there's a
Yep.
lot, but and it's very important that you really do take the time to understand what you're signing off to, because at the end of the day, the government comes knocking on your door. It's like, hey man, you signed the box, you ticked the box, and you signed that you like had read these certifications. So
You can go to
um,
jail. Yeah, it's
yeah,
like,
absolutely.
and it's a privilege to be able to be part of the government industrial base. Like, you're going to be providing goods or services to the greatest nation on the planet. So it's like you got to take that privilege seriously.
Michael, I know you
Yeah.
you got a lot of contractors you work with these days. I mean, what are some of the questions that they've got about some of these compliance
I'll,
requirements, and how are you
I'll,
guys guiding them?
yeah, I'll say the number one question today is what is that again? And why do I need to know about it? Like we've been talking about that. You talk about Groundhog Day, Adam. I think you and I have been on enough podcasts and episodes here and everywhere else to totally feel like Groundhog Day. I'm like, should I ask him that question again? Um, but yet a lot of people don't know this exists. Probably eight out of 10 of our brand new clients have no idea what this is, what's going on. And the concern for a lot of them is, so what if Q1 next year is also Groundhog Day? And
Yeah.
again and again. So like we've gotten to the point now where people are like, man, stop crying wolf on this thing. Like we've been dragging it out for, like I said, 5 years. And for 5 years, it's been this summer, coming soon, this summer, to a contract near you,
Yeah.
right? For 5 years. And now we're looking at a 6 year or so. And so I think that's the challenge in the market right now is the complacency to say, look, man, we know Groundhog Day is coming. We know there's almost 800 comments on this thing. And depending on what direction this goes, are there going to be lawsuits? Or they're going to, what's going to happen on the back end of this, depending on what DOD comes out, is depending on what's in those thousands of pages, because I've got to assume there's thousands of pages for them to read through. Are they going to make yet another change to the model?
Yeah.
And so the fear right now is, let's say I do pay 100 grand and come January, February, that's no longer applicable, or it's kicked down the road, or they just, rewrite a section of the FAR and say, okay, we're going to call this a day and move on. Kind of like, what we've seen with some of the aircraft where they're just like, was it the Osprey or whatever, where they're just dumping billions of dollars and they're like, we're done with this. We're going to walk away. Right. Like it's like, this is coming and then it's not. So like, we know cybersecurity is not going anywhere, but I think that's the challenge for a lot of people on the ground of, how far do I go down the rabbit hole given the Groundhog Day that's going on, or maybe it's the Groundhog hole. How far do I go down it given what's happened in the last few years, even though it's imminent, right?
Yeah.
That's the challenge for a lot of people. And then what we were talking about beforehand on the, so where's it going to apply? How does it affect me? I don't sell this, I do sell that. I'm a small company. I'm always going to be small. I'm always going to be under simplified acquisition. I all my other buddies who are in technology are going for the level 2 or level 3, but I really only need level 1. So I think there's still just enough confusion in the market that I honestly don't think a lot of people are going to do anything for the
Even
next
even
six
when
months.
even when they know about it, they'll still just drag their feet.
Yeah,
Well,
I see the hammer dropping in Q1 or Q2 of next year, and people still going, you know,
Yeah. There
like I mean, there's going to be a healthy amount of the population that still do that simply because of the skepticism. And so, like, we've been talking about the prep, but like, I mean, I was on the CMMC website the other day, and I like how they've gone from 5 levels to 3. I
yeah.
think that's nice, but like, I feel like I'm fairly educated and I'm like, so where's the checklist? Like, how do I find a plain English checklist for level one? And I think if there's anything like we could do for the market, it would be to find that and publish it, make sure it's out there, which I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but it's like making sure that is clear so people can start that part of the process. Because right now, what you have, whether it's, you read the FAR or anything else, and it's like, man, this doesn't seem like English to me. I don't understand what's going on. Right. So I think that would be nice to have, something that's widely available. So
Well,
do you
you
have a
kind of
link
set up
for
a
it, sir?
softball for me there, Michael,
Ooh.
because that's why Totem exists. That's why Totem Tech exists, is to provide translation interpretation for our peers. And we're a micro business ourselves, uh, subcontractor and DoD supply chains ourselves, daughter company of another micro business that's an Air Force prime contractor. So let me circle back to the first part of that. the the legitimate concern from clients that, like, it is Groundhog Day and the certification, the CMMC part of it will never come, or it'll just be kicked down the road again. That's, I think, a legitimate concern. It's the CMMC program has been fraught from the beginning with conflict of interest, with huge price tags, delays, changes to the model, inadequate communication and publication on the part of the Pentagon. But I'll reiterate, the requirements already exist. And CMMC is just the accountability, the independent certification that you're doing, what you're already supposed to be doing, what's already in contracts. And we can talk about the clauses and the various levels and which contracts the requirements get into. So yeah, you could you could adopt the attitude that CMMC is not something that I'm worried about right now, but you need to be worrying about what's in your contract, or we need to as government contractors, because there's already clauses in there. The vast majority of us already have some requirements for protections. The federal government's ramping up its the ability for the protective mechanisms for whistleblowers, and actually encouraging whistleblowers with percentages of the fines that the government recoups from False Claims Act prosecutions. The whistleblower actually gets a percentage. And so, and then there are sort of independent Department of Justice prosecutions of the False Claims Act when it discovers negligence and fraud. So there are mechanisms that the government is threatening to use and ramping up to be able to prosecute these false claims independently of whether or not there's this CMMC accreditation and or certification is the better word, certification process. So I would still advise, even though CMMC is fraught, we still have obligations. And I put a link, and I think it was shared in the general chat to everyone. I put a link to that site that you were mentioning, Michael, the CMMC site from the DoD CIO's office, where it shows the old model, the new model. So they've simplified the model a little bit.
Yeah, which is
and
awesome.
They're making it more approachable. The fact that the DoD has taken into account some of the hand-wringing and consternation that we in the community expressed 4 years ago, 5 years ago when they first rolled it out, I think means that they're not going to be backing away. They're making changes to the model to make it so that they can actually implement it, and so that those are signs that it's not going to go away. It might be delayed,
Yeah,
but
it's just a matter of when.
it's a
It's
matter
not
of
if.
when.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's not about if.
Yeah.
and we
I
have
think,
these obligations anyway.
yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that needs some clarity too is around like recouping the cost. That was something early on in all this was, hey, if this is going to cost as much as 100 grand, which is what, the number that was originally thrown out there, if it's going to cost that, and I'm $1 million company, that's probably all of our profit for the year.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yep.
somewhere in the neighborhood of that, maybe more. And so having that clearly addressed on what it's going to look like, because if I go win $100,000 contract, you're probably not going to recoup all 100 on that contract, are you? Or a portion of it, or like, so
Yeah,
like having that clearly spelled out for contractors so they know. It's like, if I'm going to do something at a smaller level and I know how the reimbursement works, that I can plan for that. I can work around that. And today it's kind of a like, well, you can spread that out, or like whatever, right? It's very fuzzy on how that's going to work. I don't even know if that's still in the current discussions. You
it
may know
is.
that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
like how
Oh,
that
well, no,
works.
recuperate reimbursement is no longer on the table.
Yeah. So they're not, so contractors are no longer going to get reimbursed for dropping 100 grand on this.
No, the DoD dropped that language in 2021.
Okay.
You used to be able to get reimbursed for the cost of the assessment of the cost of the
Mhm.
certification, which that estimate now has ballooned just for the certification uh, at level 2 for the protection of controlled unclassified information. The cost of certification, the DoD estimates at 100 grand. That's not
Wow.
implementation of all the requirements, just the certification. They did away with the reimbursement language. Now it's allowable, so you can add it to overhead.
Yeah. Okay. So you can
But
still, you can claim it just in another way. So what about like level 3? Do you have an estimate on what level 3 certification is going to cost? Is it around the same, or is it going to be?
no, it's an order of magnitude higher.
Yeah.
So DoD's estimates for the cost of certification the first time through on level 3 is 2 point something million, and something like 500,000 in annual recurring costs to sustain the implementation.
Yeah. And is that money goes to the certification company that does it, right? So like companies like yourself and other companies can get certified to do the certifications. Is that correct? Or
That is
or are they going to
correct.
do that? So
That's correct, but that's only at level 2 where you need the independent, where you'll be hiring a third party certification assessment organization to provide the certification. So there's level 1,
self, yeah.
certain types of information. You do self assessment and self affirmation. Level 2 is for the handling those of us that handle controlled unclassified information. Um, we can go down the rabbit hole of explaining like the differences between these information if we want, but this is generally information of a little of technical nature, generally above and beyond your average like federal contract information, communications related to the contract itself. When you start handling unclassified technical information, you're at level 2. At this level, you will have to hire that independent third party assessment organization to assess you and provide you a certificate. At level 3, which is for those contractors and those supply chain members that handle what I call CUI plus, which is CUI, controlled unclassified information of a technical nature related to critical weapons programs, hypersonics, missile defense, nuclear arsenal upgrade. A very few contractors, like fewer than 2,000, will be at this level out of hundreds of thousands in the industrial base. In addition to that, hiring that certifier at level 2, you'll have to pay 100 grand or so for that certification. The government comes in and does a delta assessment between level 2 and level 3. You don't pay the government anything. It's a it's an office under the Defense Contract Management Agency. You don't pay them anything, but you'll have to implement uh, a whole other set of protections, what were known as advanced or enhanced protections, to protect that critical unclassified information. And the government will issue that Delta certification. So the cost of implementation and preparing for the government certification between level 2 and level 3, the DoD is estimating at $2.3 million.
Wow.
And so you're right, like 10% of $1 million revenue uh, gone on assessment, that's most of our profit. You're totally right. The Department of Defense is expecting attrition, mergers, and acquisitions to result from the costs of implementation and certification.
Yeah.
It's they have stated that assumption and that expectation in their publications.
Yeah. Have you seen they did gosh, I don't remember what the document was called. It's like a small business, um, report that they put out. I believe it was not this past January, but like last January, February timeframe. And so in 23, and it was kind of like their strategic plan for DoD. And like they acknowledged in there that the industrial base was shrinking. They had a goal to increase it, but like, here's 15 things we're going to do that's probably going to cut it in half. you know,
Yeah.
it's like how the irony of, hey, our goal is to do this, but we're going to just slaughter the base with some of these things that we're going to do. I can see how a lot of people will just say, this was already too difficult. I'm just going to leave the market, which on one hand opens doors for a lot of people that stick around in the market that
It
say,
does.
hey, we're going to make the investment and we are going to stick around, because if there's less companies, there's less competition. And so I can see the pros and cons of that and how that may shake out. Do you see on like the level 2, do you see a situation where there becomes a self-assessment for that one, and then we're just doing the other thing on level 3, or is it or 2 is probably just always going to be an outside party coming in?
No, actually, the framework allows for certain contractors that handle CUI and need a level 2 to do a self-assessment. But
Okay.
the DoD estimates there will only be about 5% of us, about
Yeah.
4,000 companies out of the 80,000 plus that will need a level 2 certification. Only about 4,000 of us will um, be afforded that self
Okay.
assessment. We certainly handle CUI on both of the companies, our parent company and Totem Tech, and we're prepping for a level 2 certification where we'll have to
Gotcha.
actually have to go hire that third party. We're not
You have
going to
to,
assume
yeah,
that.
you can't do it yourself, even though you get certified.
Yeah, and
Oh,
yeah, so we're assuming worst case scenario and planning for that.
yeah. So, uh, I think a lot of people, they hear about a lot of this stuff and they still gloss over on, so what is this again? And when I'm talking to people, it's like at the different levels, you go from mostly policy and procedures to equipment and software. Is probably a really simple way to break this out, right? Where at one level, it's like, how do you handle documents? Like actually having documented policies, procedures, and making sure people are using them, right? That's one of those things that, you don't just have people. You got, Janice over in accounting who's like, I don't care about that. I'm not using that. I'm just gonna, put this in my Google Drive because, it's easier for me to work from home that way, right? Um, but like the policies and procedures, making sure people are using, and then there's the technology and equipment that have to actually go through all of this. Some of it could be as simple as filing cabinets that lock, doors that lock, right? Things like that, so it's protected. But also like the firewall software and other different things that are going on. Can you talk a little bit about that for the folks that are like, I hear cybersecurity and like, hey, we all change our passwords and we're using secure webs. Like we should be able to pass, like, so give us a little bit of info on that.
You should be able to pass, but um, I have issue as a small business owner. I think the requirements that the federal government and Department of Defense have put out there they're too much, and we should have implemented a true maturity model where you have simple things like endpoint protection, multi-factor authentication, and you're good to go at level 1, and a significant way to level 2. But it's not that way. It's not set up that way. And I think I see the technology versus policy procedures thing a little bit differently, Michael. So at all 3 levels, I when I look at the controls, I've been looking at the controls a long time, and in my mind, they're about 50% at all 3 levels. 50% policy and procedures, that so stuff you have to do as an organization to develop a cybersecurity culture and some sort of muscle memory for how cybersecurity is done, and then 50% technology or tangible things that help enforce those policies, whether it's a piece of equipment or like a lock on a door, like you're talking about. So at all 3 levels, I see that 50% split. We can talk about it at level 1. So all federal contractors, no matter what, with the lone exceptions of commercial off-the-shelf software or commercial off-the-shelf products and below the micro purchase threshold. Those are the only two exceptions. But all federal government contractors will see the FAR 52-204-21 clause in solicitations and contracts and expect it to be flowed down. And that the DoD will require a CMMC level 1 self-assessment for that clause. And within that requirement, there's a sort of spectrum of cybersecurity protections that we have to put in place that range from physically protecting the building with locks on doors and windows, and in most cases, like badged access readers or key codes, not leaving doors to the facility unlocked, closing up garage bay doors on warehouses, those sorts of things. One end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is logical digital access control into like requiring a username and password to log into a laptop. And then in between, there are other technological requirements as well as policy and procedure requirements sprinkled throughout that spectrum. For instance, you're required to have endpoint protection on all of your endpoints, antiviruses. You're required to use a firewall, even at level 1. You're required to do vulnerability scans, which involves technology that most small businesses don't by default have in place. It's relatively cheap or cost-effective technology, but it's not a typical consideration for a small business. You're talking about technology. You're also talking about policies and procedures. So you're required to have an acceptable use policy for your staff that identifies who within the staff is allowed to publish corporate information publicly, like on websites, social media, identifies who can do that, restricts everyone else from doing that, and requires the company to introduce a sort of training and review policy to make sure that no federal government information accidentally spills. So that's a policy type of thing. No technology is needed there, but it's policies and procedures. So you're required to develop a policy on how you handle sanitization and destruction of paper, shredding, burning, recycling. So that could be met through policies and hiring out a shredding company. So you have this mix, and it's about 50-50, and that's true for all 3 levels. So that's how I see it. The difference between the levels is the number of things that you have to do within policy and technology and procedures. At level 1, you have 17 things you have to do. At level 2, you have 110. At level 3, you have 124. 134. So it's this order of magnitude increase in the number of things you have to do as opposed to a difference between policy and technology at each level. That's how I see it.
Yeah. No, that's a really good breakdown. I think for a lot of folks, as they're going through and they start looking at that list, that's where, like you said earlier, the investment's going to come of we don't have these things installed in our facility, whether it is the right door locks or badge readers or, when I was at one company, we didn't have authenticators on our phone. You had the little key fob thing you carried around that,
yeah,
and with the rolling codes. And so like all of those things cost money and they all require subscriptions and different things. And so having to implement that stuff to make sure you're compliant is where a lot of people, I think, are going to struggle initially out of the gate of, well, I think we handle it really well. Oh, well, you really only check 11 of the 17 boxes.
Yeah.
Given what, if you really were to assess this the way it is. So no, it's all really good information. And I think that's why we keep having you on Groundhog Day to come back and talk about this stuff. Cause it's almost a full-time job keeping up with what's going on and the changes and, trying to predict the future a little bit on where this thing is headed. And it's a serious topic. The other part of it for folks is, so DoD is first and then the rest of the government. And like you said, there's still clauses everywhere, but as far as the hammer of CMMC, that's where a lot of people are dragging their feet too. They're, oh, well, I'm not going to do business with the Army or whatever. I'm not too concerned about that. So I think that's where the market needs a little bit of education or constant education on is coming to a neighborhood near you, regardless of where you're doing business. It's just when, right?
It's just when DoD is the tip of the spear, and that's
Yeah.
typically how it is.
Yeah.
Well, man, this is great information, Adam. And we got a little bit of time, but before we get to the Q&A part, I want to ask you to talk about the couple of workshops because you've got a couple of CMMC workshops coming up. We've got a CMMC level 1 workshop, and in fact, we posted that right on the page of Govology. And I think I put a picture that probably kind of sums up what the way most contractors are dealing with CMMC right now. So if you could see that little
Yeah.
screenshot, So unfortunately, that's not a good posture to be in. So can you talk about like these two workshops that you've got? What if I know that I'm a government contractor already, or like I want to really get our company and team ramped up and make the commitment to do this. What am I looking at in terms of, and I know some of this will be dictated by looking at kind of like solicitations within the contracts that you want to do, because that's where the clauses are. And you could go back and look at historical, maybe to see what has been historically there. But just kind of like in a nutshell, like if I wanted to say, all right, let's just go ahead and get level 1 done, so we can kind of start. At least we're making progress to it. I'll learn a lot more about protecting data and things of that nature, and then maybe going up to level 2. So you've got the CMMC level 1 workshop, which is at the homepage of Govology for folks that want to get to that one, and then you got the second one. So can you talk about the first one first, the level 1 workshop, and then we also have a deadline for that because that starts on April 8th.
Yeah. Yeah. And we really appreciate the opportunity to team up with you all, Carol, and host these workshops. So Michael said it perfectly a few minutes ago, where he was like, most of us go into the self-assessment or reading through these clauses and we think we're in better position. Our company is in better cybersecurity position than it actually is. And we might think we're 17 out of 17 at level 1. Like, we have physical security, we have the endpoint security, but we really don't. And when you dig into how the government expects us to do the box checking, like the self-assessment, we might end up only at an 11 out of 17 or an 8 out of 17. So what level 1 is, the workshop is explaining in layperson's terms what the requirements are. And this is Totem's business model. This is what we're all about. This is our mission. Explaining in layperson's terms, translating, interpreting what it is the government's asking us to do, and equipping you with the tools to perform that in granular check at the level that the DoD and really a federal government at level 1 expects us to do the check. So we train you in the workshop how to do that self-assessment using the tools that we have. And we built our company around a cloud-based sort of checklist platform that provides all the interpretation, provides a workflow and a mechanism that allows a company to do the self-assessment, which is going to be required at level 1. And then plenty of time in the course of the workshop to ask questions where there's still some gray area, or it's one of the terms are ambiguous or nebulous, and you as a potential or current government contractor still don't understand. It's a 3-week long workshop, a couple of hour time commitment each week, so not too burdensome. We spread it out over 3 weeks to make it more approachable, and plenty of time. In fact, there's a full 1 hour Q&A session each week, what we'll call return and report call, where you get to come and ask any questions that you have about specifically how to implement these requirements at your organization. I'll just give a for instance. So I mentioned this requirement that you have doors and locks on your windows at your facility, if you operate a facility. We find all the time, especially in nice climates like Southern California, where there's a huge government industrial base, that they have locks on the doors and windows, but they don't use them. They have the doors and windows and garage bay doors wide open all the time. because the weather's nice and it's nice to have a breeze through for the line workers that are operating the machines or running the forklifts and loading and shipping and receiving. Like it's nice to have that breeze through. But that is so you have the mechanism available to you as an organization, but you're not using it. That's not going to pass an assessment because I could easily dress up in a UPS outfit or even put on some company swag like a polo shirt for that company and pose as an adversary and walk right in, walk out with some of the sensitive government information. And so we need to, even though we might have the mechanisms in place, we often find ourselves needing to be retrained to actually use those mechanisms. And so it's that kind of subtle and nuanced understanding of what's going to be required of us that we break down in the level 1 workshop for all 17 of the requirements.
Yeah, awesome, man. I'm actually looking forward to it because this is the first time you broke it out on the level 1, and before we had the level 2, which is really great as well. That's they go ahead to say a 9-week workshop, and this
That's
kind of
9
goes
weeks.
a little bit more. What I love about the workshops that you're doing is that like you're learning, you're applying and implementing as you go along, and then you've got like the expert at there, Adam, where it's like I'm sure Adam, if they were to hire you on a one-on-one consulting basis, it's probably would be more expensive for them on your hourly rate. Whereas like where you do it in the series, they could save a little bit of money by basically being on the group calls where you can talk to everybody. And then everybody kind of gets the benefit of hearing the discussion. And it's like, oh yeah, I, I had that question, but I didn't want to ask it too.
Yeah, there's a lot
So
of that. Yeah, we call
awesome.
it a cohort. You're
Yeah.
with a group of like-minded individuals participating together, getting our hands dirty, so to speak, implementing these requirements.
When is the deadline for that one that we're putting on there
It
for
kicks
the level
off
1?
April 8th, so last registration will be, let's see here, I got to pull up my calendar, the 5th of April. So you have uh 10 calendar days.
Awesome. Well, that's on our homepage. If you guys want to check that out at gavology.com for the CMMC level 1, I would encourage everybody to actually take that program. I'm definitely going to be, participating as much as I can inside of that as well, because I've already actually ran up across a state contract. So this is the other side that probably would be helpful to know for someone is that I've already run up against a state contract that actually has some of their own requirements built into it, which was not applicable to our business. And what you might find is that you get a contract from an agency that's using boilerplate language, and maybe they're
Yeah.
using the wrong type of clauses in your contract. And you also have to be able to know when to say, look, I'm not going to be getting access to your systems, so this really doesn't apply to me. And there's opportunities where you can go back to the agency and say, can you remove this requirement from this contract? And they can take that to whoever their risk manager is or whatever. And a lot of times, if it doesn't apply, they can take it out. Whereas, you don't want something to apply where it doesn't have to apply to begin with, especially when you're looking at something serious of this nature.
Yeah,
So,
inexpensive.
and
And
I
we
can
have
see,
successfully helped, oh, I'll say a couple handfuls of clients. I'll euphemistically say open up that channel of communication
yeah,
and get it in writing that these particular clauses don't apply to them. And that is there's no such thing as a self-deleting clause from a contract, but that is the negation of that clause if you have it in writing from your customer that it doesn't apply.
that's a good thing to know too. So we're excited about that one. The level 2 is also on Gavology. If you guys just want to go to gavology.com/CMMC, you can read all about that workshop, what's included in there. So for those of you guys who think that you might need to go to that next step, that would be another great workshop, a little bit more in depth. But man, I'm so glad that you're doing these and that you're out there to really try to do your best to make as much as you can, as affordable as possible to the small businesses out there. We really didn't get too much time to talk about, the micro enterprises that sometimes it's like doesn't matter really. It's like if you're a one person shop, if you got the requirements, you got to comply with it, so you got to figure that out for yourself. And make your decision on whether or not you're going to decide to do business with the agency at that level. But no, this is great, Michael. And I know, and Adam, we're getting close to our hour here, but I'd like to go to some questions. But do you guys have anything that you'd like to share before we break to go to Q&A?
I'm putting a link in the chat. Maybe Elena could share it with everyone. I don't have the ability to share with everyone. It's our blog that does an overview of the CMMC framework. I would
Oh, cool.
encourage the audience to read that. It breaks down. It's a synopsis of what's a 200 some page document that the DoD published, and we condensed it down into a few scrolls on a web page. Goes through the price, estimated costs for all this stuff, and the phased implementation as well. So anyone that's interested more in what's coming down the pike for CMMC certification, I would encourage them to check that out.
And we'll get those posted, or if you guys are watching this on demand, just reach out to us at support@govology.com, and we can kind of get those links to you, as well as the links for the 2 workshops that Adam does. And so with that, let's break for this episode of GovCon Coffee and Issues. I really, again, Adam, thank you so much for joining us again, and Michael, thank you for also participating and sharing some of your thoughts and questions. Some great dialogue that we had in this session today. So again, thank you all for participating. We'll take a break here and take a few questions. So I'm going to open the Q&A box here. And so first question we've got here, Adam, is false claim, maybe this is a comment, false claim and whistleblower will be the hammer behind CMMC.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what you really don't want to do is not comply and then make your employees angry.
That's right.
Pay your employees well.
Yeah. The government's got to pay that national debt somehow, so they got to collect some money. Hey, Carol, I have to hop off here in just a minute. We have the book launch today.
Yeah, man.
So I got to get off and hop on another thing. So I'll leave folks with this real quick. My new book just dropped today.
Awesome.
If you're new to government contracting and you don't know where to start, this book is actually that question, right? It answers it in very much detail. I can post a link for Elena to post as well. I'll send that over to her. But if you want to grab this today, it's just $9.95. It'll be that price today only, and it's like $25 after that. So go get it 60% off. So
Michael's books are awesome.
Thank
Congrats,
you,
Michael.
Can you do me a favor and post that link also in Govology Nation so we could?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll post it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
But yeah, it's a great book, and thanks for the endorsement, Adam. I'll reach out to you about one of the next books we have coming out in later this year. So
sounds good.
All right, guys. I gotta hop off and get on another thing for book launch stuff. So we'll see you later, Carol. See you everybody next month.
Michael.
All right. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
All right, we got a couple of more questions that we'll take here. I'm a startup SDVOSB small operation. Is there a Q&A checkoff list that I can use to at least have a semi-official inventory of what I have? In other words, as I check off the list that I know I'm adhering to.
Yeah, we have several types of checklists available for download from our free tools page. I'll put a link to this in the chat for distribution to everyone. There is an inventory spreadsheet in there that you can use to take account of all of the assets, the IT assets that you have. Let me concentrate on what I'm doing here so I can pop this link in the chat. There's an inventory list. There also is a CMMC level 1 checklist available. I mentioned that we built our company around this cloud-based platform that has all of the requirements and all of the assessment objectives listed in that. We offer free trials to that as well, 30-day free trials. And as part of the workshop, I should have mentioned this, Carol, you get access for the duration of the workshop, you get access to that tool and training in how to use that tool. So while the workshops aren't free, you will 100% get the value out of the workshop just from understanding all the resources that are out there that are free and how to use those particular resources.
Awesome. Um, again, guys, if you want to raise your hand and actually come on and ask your question live, we invite you to do that at this time. Um, we have a couple more questions in the Q&A box here. Where can we find these action items in relation to CMMC levels? Or that's not a full necessarily question.
Yeah, so ultimately the CMMC, the requirement for the protection of the information, the federal government has adopted standards that are published by NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And there's one in particular, the 800-171. So I'll type that. And is this one of the questions? And maybe I can answer that question. Let's see here. I'm not sure which question was
That
who
was just
posed this.
from Michael Dunn. It's down a little bit, about
There
a
we go.
little bit
Yeah.
more than halfway there.
So if you search for 800-171 Rev 2 and 800-171A, those are from NIST, so I'm sending that now. Those are the standards that we have to implement with the list of cybersecurity practices that we have to put in place to protect information. The controlled unclassified information. The DoD supplements on top of those and publishes something called assessment guides. And those were at the DoD CMMC model. Let's see, I'll put a link here in the chat as well, documentation. You can find assessment guides as well as scoping guides on the DoD's websites. Elena, I'll put this in the chat here.
And he also was mentioning the 17 requirements for level 1.
Yep, those are in the assessment guides published by the DoD. But something to know is that in the 800-171 standard published by NIST, that actually encapsulates all of the level 1 requirements as well. So there are 110 requirements in the 800-171 standard. 17 of those are the level 1 requirements. Then when we start talking about level 3, there's another document, the 800-172, that NIST will be modifying to, well, let me say this again. The DoD is in the process of building out a CMMC level 3 assessment guide as well. It hasn't been published yet, but it's under development. And we would expect that to be released sometime early enough to facilitate level 3 government assessments whenever the CMMC rule is finalized. But there are 24 additional requirements out there. If you work on critical weapons programs and need to start paying attention to those additional 24, you can reach out to me. You can read the blog post that I shared with you all that breaks out those requirements and where you can find more about those at the level 3.
Another question that was here is for companies already holding ISO 27001, do you see the transition to CMMC easier than from scratch?
Oh yeah, that will be a much easier transition, especially if you're 27001 2022. The 2013, actually the 2013 version of that standard, NIST actually produced a mapping between it and the 800-171 Rev 2. But the 2022 version of ISO 27001 has a lot more requirements, and if you're meeting that, then there will be a lot of overlap between that and the requirements that CMMC will be assessing for, the NIST standard. The unfortunate thing is that there's no easy way to map between those two. There's not a one-to-one correlation. And really unfortunate thing is that the DoD is not recognizing any sort of reciprocity for meeting other industry accepted cybersecurity standards like ISO 27001. Understandably, the NIST standard is much more focused on the protection of certain types of DoD information. And so I understand the DoD's trepidation on allowing that sort of reciprocity, but it would have been nice if there was some sort of mapping that was provided. But it's going to be way easier than starting from scratch if you already have a 27001 certification.
Yeah. And since ISO was mentioned, actually, I recalled seeing in the federal acquisition regulation in part 46 there, they have these higher level contract requirements, and basically they talk about examples of that, like the ISO and everything else like that. So again, this is where the FAR starts to talk about these higher level requirements, but then it says that agency shall establish the procedures when determining the higher level contract quality requirements, etc., specific to their contracts. And so that's why each agency, and with those ones that maybe are not a DoD agency, not dealing with as much sensitive material, you might see different types of requirements than what's in the CMMC, if that's an accurate maybe assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So
each agency is
yeah,
independent.
yeah. Um, so yeah, only really last question I think that we've got in the queue here. Oh, kind of two questions. The first is, can you repeat the NIST documents related to CMMC?
Yep. Yeah, so NIST 800-171. If you search for that term and look for the latest publications from NIST on those, you will see the requirements. Those are the requirements for the protection of controlled unclassified information, which is CMMC level 2, but they also include the requirements for CMMC level 1. And if you want a better breakdown between those two, if you go to the DoD's website, and I put a link in the chat that I think has been shared with everyone, they have assessment guides for CMMC level 1, level 2 that reiterate those requirements that are published by NIST.
Some last question. I see 787 comments were received by the DoD, but only 368 comments are posted. Why is that?
Let's see. Let me go there and just see. They have. I'm on the publication right now. I'm just seeing how many comments have been published.
Maybe they want to read them before they
They
publish them.
they do.
They only got
There's
up
a
to
vetting
368.
thing that they go through.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like it took 10 days before my comment was posted, even after I submitted it.
Yeah.
So we got 787 comments submitted. If we go to that, how many have actually been posted? There's probably just a backlog between the review, the submission, and the public posting of these things. 368. Yeah. So I think they're just behind. The Pentagon's just behind in actually posting these things. Maybe some of them were duplicates. But yeah, you'll eventually that number will catch up.
All righty. Awesome, Michael. Oh, sorry, Adam. Thanks, man. Well, that's all the questions that we've got for today, Adam. Again, thank you for partnering with us. We're grateful to have your partnership as well, and I'm excited to see what's in the level 1 training and take part in that as much as I can for myself, because I know all of us really need to get up to speed with cybersecurity. This is just it's a really good formalized way to do it. Even with going back really quick to the COTS item, you also got to understand as a contractor that there's a lot of contractors that sell commercial off the shelf, but they also do other contracts, right? And every contract that you're going to do is going to be different. And so ensure that, you not just think, well, we just fill COTS items. Well, you got to read the solicitations, and you never know what they're going to have in there. And so you want to make sure that you're picking those up and understanding it. If it's really something that is not required, go back to them and ask them, if they could take that particular requirement out. But anyway, here we are. So again, I want to encourage everyone, if you want to join that CMMC Level 1 workshop with us, that's right on the Govology homepage, front and center with the ostrich with his head sticking in the dirt. So we got only a week or so left if you want to get signed up for it. So please go and check that out. If you do sign up, we look forward to seeing you in the workshop. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you back again some point in the
Next
near
Groundhog
future,
Day.
Adam. All right. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Take care,
Thanks.
everyone.